didn't see you there. Hello, my friend, or as the locals would say, hola, mi amigo. My name is Linn Huang, CEO of IDIS858. If I'm not mistaken, this video has reached you because you are planning on traveling to or are currently in Chile. If you plan on doing any shopping whilst in Chile, this video is quite necessary as it is designed to train you in the basics of haggling. Foreign to the concept of haggling? Don't worry, you're not alone. In well-established economies, haggling is not common practice. However, here in Chile and other developing economies, one must haggle or be haggled. So what is haggling? Some would have you convinced that it is an oratory art, pitting one negotiator against another in a battle to gain the economic upper hand. Others might say that it is a noble cause, in which an individual bravely stands up against the profiteering machine. Here at IDIS858, we prefer a more scientific approach. But before we can begin with your training, a crash course in microeconomics is firstly necessary. Let's begin with your competitor, the supplier. The supplier's primary target is to reap profits. Profits are the revenues collected from you during the transaction, subtracting costs the supplier accrues while supplying the product. As the consumer, your main objective is to maximize your utility. Utility is defined here as your satisfaction with the transaction. Now, let's see how these two variables interact in the market. This graph shows a relationship between quantities of goods and prices. A supplier is willing to supply more goods if he can charge a higher price. Thus, the supply curve is upward sloping. Consumers demand less goods as prices increase. Thus, the demand curve is downward sloping. In equilibrium, the upward sloping supply curve and the downward sloping demand curve intersect, and at this point, suppliers supply exactly what consumers demand. Now, let us skip over a few hundred microeconomic principles and pair the relevance of this entire model down to a single transaction. The western quadrant of this graph is of primary interest to us. First, let us draw a line that marks the price point. For a single transaction, the area of the triangle above the price line correlates to the consumer's utility. The area of the triangle below the price line correlates to the supplier's profits. Notice that in equilibrium, the two areas are exactly the same. That is, utility and profits are balanced. Now let's see what happens when we move the price line. A shift upward to a more expensive price point results in higher profits for the supplier, but lower utility for you, the consumer. Lower the price point, and consumer utility increases at the expense of supplier profits. Notice the two opposing forces operate in a zero-sum game. Haggling, thus, is the science of pushing the price line down at the expense of the supplier's profits. Typically, even the most amateur of hagglers can successfully negotiate a 10% discount. Keep practicing, and you may be able to haggle discounts of 20% or even 30%. Be careful though, while haggling for a 100% discount may seem like an obvious objective, in many cultures, including Chile, this is considered to be theft and is prosecutable by law. Now that we've defined what haggling is, let's proceed to some tips that will expand your capacity to successfully haggle. For this, we turn to Porter's 5 forces. These 5 forces describe a firm's ability to reap economic profit in a competitive market. Your task as the haggler is to recoup some of these profits in the form of discounts. The first force we will discuss is threats of new entry. If a market is profitable, new firms will enter the market unless sufficient barriers exist to protect the existing firm. Some of these barriers include brand equity and customer loyalty, required capital, and policy and regulation. Firms that feel less pressure from threats of new entry also feel less pressure to provide pricing discounts. A firm that operates in a market where brand equity is highly rated and customers develop deep loyalties to these brands typically is not susceptible to haggling. For this reason, haggling in shopping malls is not recommended for the amateur. Likewise, firms that operate in markets with large capital requisites also do not easily succumb to haggling. An energy conglomerate such as Endesa would sooner hang up the phone on you than provide you pricing adjustments. Finally, any agency with heavy regulation is likely to reject the haggling overtures of even the most accomplished haggler. Don't believe me? Try walking into your local firehouse and negotiating taxes you pay to support their services. Thus, for the purposes of this training video, we direct our sights to Pueblo Los Dominicos. The Pueblo Los Dominicos is an open marketplace that features 200 local merchants, including artisans, bakers, fashion designers, and other craft producers. Such a marketplace features low brand equity, low capital requisites, and negligible regulations, making it the perfect training ground for a first-time haggler. Proceeding with Porter's 5 forces, let's tackle supplier bargaining power. This is the leverage suppliers enjoy over producers and includes breadth of suppliers, input differentiation, and producer solidarity. Let's start with breadth of suppliers and look at lapis lazuli jewelry artisans. Lapis lazuli is the national stone of Chile and is marked by its distinctive blue color. Because lapis lazuli is so prevalent in Chile, merchants can procure the stone from different suppliers, circumventing expensive suppliers for their cheaper counterparts. Input differentiation describes the difference in quality and prices of inputs. Let's study how input differences affect bakers in the small community. Bakers pride themselves on the quality of their food. Often, this is tied directly with the ingredients they source. However, ask yourself, could you tell the difference between 2 different supplies of flour whilst enjoying an empanada? I know I can't. This allows the baker to negotiate more favorable deals for his inputs. Finally, let's look at our producer solidarity. Producer solidarity occurs when rival producers join forces to ensure input suppliers price fairly. Think of the Farming Association of America, or even rival solar companies working with the same lobbyists for the betterment of the industry. In Pueblo Los Dominicos, producer solidarity is evident in the rampant price fixing. Consider this. Rival jewelry artisans produce different jewelries based on their artistic visions. However, earrings are priced the exact same from merchant to merchant, as are necklaces and bracelets. How does this price fixing occur? Producers work together to ensure that their costs are reasonable and priced in such a way where there is profit readily accessible to each merchant. Now, let us move our discussion to competitive intensity. Competitive intensity dictates the amount of profit firms may have to sacrifice to prevent attrition to another firm's goods. This includes advertising maintenance, proprietary technology, and innovation. For large producers in a competitive industry, advertising is often a substantial expense. Many times, competing firms saturate the market with advertising, such that advertising no longer serves the role of growing business, but is aimed at protecting against attrition. In our small market, advertising is negligible, and thus each merchant feels less pressure to engage in costly advertising to attract consumers away from their rival. Proprietary technology also plays a role in competition. Proprietary technology often allows one firm to dominate the market, placing additional pressure on rival firms to compete through other avenues, such as lower pricing or negative advertising. In our small market, with a lack of obvious proprietary technology by any one merchant, each merchant can compete solely on the strength of their product. Finally, innovation can intensify competition. Along with advertising, R&D can typically occupy a high percentage of a firm's expense. When one firm innovates, another must innovate in conjunction or face obsolescence. In our small market, merchants have typically been producing their products with traditions passed on through many generations. In the absence of innovation, firms can avoid the constant and costly expense of innovating to catch up to their competitors. Now, Let us move on to substitutable goods.
Substitutable goods threaten firms when there are large availabilities of substitutable goods, low levels of perceived differentiation, and buyer propensity to substitute.
In short, when there are many substitutable goods in the market, these goods are perceived as homogeneous in quality, and buyers have no reticence in switching across products, merchants cannot charge a premium over their competitors, as they risk losing all of their business to other merchants charging lower prices.
Let us use an example to illustrate the importance of this economic principle. To simplify things, let's start with 3 all-American products. Suppose Andy sells hamburgers for $5, Benny sells hot dogs for $3, and Chris sells barbecue ribs for $7 at the food court. Let us also assume that all externalities held constant, a typical consumer views a $5 hamburger as equally desirable as a $3 hot dog and $7 barbecue rib platter. Let's see what happens if one of our merchants raises his price by even $1. If Chris decides to sell his barbecue platter for $8, then consumers will not view his product as equal value to a hamburger or a hot dog and will begin switching until all of Chris's business is lost to Andy or Benny. Now suppose Benny decides to sell hot dogs for $2. Now, hot dogs represent the best deal in the small market, and soon all consumers will switch to hot dogs, again assuming all 3 products are equally desirable.
Now, let us return to Pueblo Los Dominicos.
There are roughly 200 merchants, 50% of which sell lapis lazuli jewelry, 20% which sell copper trinkets, 15% which sell leather goods, 10% which sell alpaca scarves, and the remaining 5% includes bakeries, art galleries, and even a guitar crafter. Look at this list and tell me, where do you think you could haggle for the best deals?
Before we proceed, let us review some key concepts on how to choose your merchant.